You there! Take that shiny jewelry off your shirt right now!
Judge, this is not jewelry. This is the Silver Star Medal.
Judge ordered a disabled SEAL to remove her silver star. Then, her next move ended his career. "Remove that jewelry immediately, or I'll hold you in contempt," Judge Harrison commanded disabled Navy SEAL Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, wearing her silver star, in traffic court. He had no idea the Pentagon's General Counsel and Joint Chiefs Chairman were monitoring this hearing through secure channels. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, 34, faced contempt of court for refusing to remove her silver star earned through classified SEAL operations that officially never existed. Her disability from combat wounds couldn't protect her from judicial ignorance. Admiral Patricia Rodriguez, Judge Harrison's former Naval Academy classmate, watched her protege face civilian authority that had forgotten military law and federal supremacy. Her intervention would reshape judicial understanding forever. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen had served 8 years with SEAL Team 3, becoming one of the first women to complete classified special warfare training programs that enabled female operators to conduct missions requiring gender-specific infiltration capabilities. Her Silver Star was earned during classified counterterrorism operation in Syria, where she'd eliminated high-value target while extracting civilian hostages, sustaining spinal injuries from IED blast that required ongoing medical treatment and mobility assistance. The classified nature of Sarah's operations meant her service record remained compartmentalized at presidential authorization levels, while her combat decorations were authentic military awards that federal law protected from civilian interference or judicial authority. Her transition to civilian life included law school and veteran advocacy work, while managing service-connected disabilities that required adaptive equipment and ongoing medical care that VA benefits were designed to address. Sarah's Silver Star represented personal sacrifice and national service that civilian courts had no authority to question or restrict, while her military bearing remained evident despite wheelchair mobility and ongoing medical challenges. Judge Robert Harrison operated municipal traffic court with civilian authority that emphasized compliance with local procedures while demonstrating complete ignorance about military law, federal supremacy, and constitutional protections governing military personnel and service decorations. His judicial philosophy prioritized courtroom control over federal law, creating systematic conflict with military personnel, whose service decorations were protected by federal statute and constitutional principles that local courts couldn't override through judicial authority. Harrison's particular hostility toward military displays reflected civilian prejudice against service members, while his ignorance about military law would create federal constitutional crisis, requiring institutional accountability and judicial education. Admiral Patricia Rodriguez served as Deputy Chief of Naval Operations while monitoring federal cases affecting military personnel through Pentagon legal liaison networks that ensured civilian courts respected military law and federal supremacy, governing service decorations and veteran rights requiring institutional protection. Sarah Chen's appearance in Judge Harrison's traffic court began routinely until her Silver Star on military dress uniform triggered judicial hostility toward military displays that Harrison interpreted as courtroom defiance rather than recognizing federal law protecting service decorations from civilian interference. Ma'am, this court prohibits jewelry and decorative items that create distraction during proceedings. Remove that pin immediately, Harrison ordered, his civilian authority conflicting with federal military law that protected service decorations from state court interference. Sarah maintained military composure while recognizing constitutional crisis, where local judicial authority attempted to override federal protections governing military personnel and service decorations that civilian courts lacked jurisdiction to restrict or regulate. Your Honor, this is Silver Star decoration earned through combat operations. Federal law protects military decorations from civilian court interference, while my service record provides legal basis for wearing authenticated military awards, Sarah replied respectfully. Harrison's response revealed fundamental ignorance about military law. This court's authority supersedes federal regulations regarding courtroom protocol. Military personnel receive no special treatment, exempting them from local judicial procedures. The confrontation created federal jurisdictional crisis where state court attempted to override constitutional protections, while Sarah's military bearing and legal knowledge enabled appropriate challenge to judicial overreach, violating established federal supremacy. Bailiff, ensure defendant complies with court orders or face immediate contempt proceedings with potential incarceration for defying judicial authority, Harrison announced, his escalation creating constitutional crisis, where local court threatened to imprison military personnel for exercising federally protected rights. Sarah's legal training recognized systematic violation of federal law, while her military status provided constitutional protections that state courts couldn't override through local authority or judicial procedure that conflicted with federal supremacy. Your Honor, I respectfully request clarification whether this court claims authority to override federal law protecting military decorations and service member rights that constitutional supremacy establishes through federal statute, Sarah challenged professionally. Harrison's anger escalated. This defendant's defiance warrants immediate sanctions. Federal law doesn't exempt military personnel from local court authority when appearing before state judicial proceedings. The judicial ignorance created systematic constitutional violation, while Sarah's case activated federal oversight networks monitoring civilian court interference with military personnel and federal law, requiring immediate intervention and institutional accountability. Sarah maintained military discipline despite facing judicial authority that demonstrated fundamental ignorance about federal law, while her service decorations became focus of constitutional confrontation between state court overreach and federal supremacy, protecting military personnel. Your Honor, this Silver Star represents combat service where I was wounded defending American interests. Federal law specifically protects military decorations from civilian court interference, while constitutional supremacy prevents state authority from overriding federal protections, Sarah explained. Harrison's contempt citation represented systematic violation of federal law, while his threatened incarceration of military personnel created constitutional crisis, requiring immediate federal intervention and judicial accountability. Furthermore, Your Honor, my military status provides federal protections that this court lacks jurisdiction to override through local procedure conflicting with constitutional supremacy and military law, Sarah continued, establishing legal foundation for federal challenge. The confrontation attracted federal attention as Sarah's secure communication device indicated Pentagon monitoring of civilian court interference with military personnel, whose federal protections warranted institutional response and constitutional enforcement. Pentagon legal networks activated immediate response protocols ensuring civilian courts respected federal supremacy, while Sarah's case became catalyst for systematic judicial education about military law and constitutional protections requiring ongoing institutional oversight. Admiral Patricia Rodriguez received immediate notification through Pentagon legal monitoring systems when civilian court attempted to force military personnel to remove combat decorations, her response activating federal intervention protocols protecting service members from judicial overreach, violating constitutional supremacy. Judge Harrison is attempting to force Lieutenant Commander Chen to remove Silver Star earned through classified combat operations, while threatening contempt charges for exercising federally protected rights, Rodriguez announced to Pentagon General Counsel during emergency conference. Federal legal coordination included Justice Department Civil Rights Division, while military legal networks provided constitutional expertise, ensuring civilian courts respected federal supremacy, governing military personnel and service decorations that state authority couldn't regulate. Additionally, Lieutenant Commander Chen's Silver Star was earned through classified SEAL operations requiring presidential authorization to acknowledge, while federal law specifically protects military decorations from civilian court interference. Rodriguez continued. Congressional oversight activated immediate investigation of judicial overreach, while Sarah's case became federal precedent establishing constitutional protections for military personnel facing civilian court harassment and systematic violation of federal law. Furthermore, Judge Harrison's threatened contempt citation against military personnel wearing authenticated service decorations violates federal statute and constitutional supremacy, requiring immediate federal intervention, Rodriguez declared. Joint Chiefs Chairman General Michael Santos received Admiral Rodriguez's briefing about civilian court harassment of military personnel, while Sarah's case activated highest levels of federal military authority, ensuring constitutional protections received appropriate enforcement and institutional support. Lieutenant Commander Chen's case represents systematic civilian court interference with federal military law, while Judge Harrison's actions require immediate constitutional correction through federal authority and judicial accountability, Santos announced during Pentagon briefing. Federal military authority superseded state court jurisdiction when constitutional violations affected military personnel whose service decorations were protected by federal statute that civilian courts couldn't override through local procedure or judicial ignorance. Additionally, Lieutenant Commander Chen's Silver Star represents classified combat operations that civilian authorities lack clearance to question, while federal law prevents state court interference with military decorations and service member rights, Santos continued. Supreme Court precedent established federal supremacy over state authority when constitutional protections were violated, while Sarah's case would create permanent precedent ensuring civilian courts respected military law and federal constitutional principles. Furthermore, this intervention demonstrates federal commitment to protecting military personnel from civilian court harassment, while ensuring constitutional supremacy receives appropriate enforcement through institutional accountability, Santos declared. Federal District Court issued emergency injunction blocking state court proceedings against Sarah while establishing constitutional precedent that civilian courts lack jurisdiction to restrict military decorations or threatens military personnel for exercising federally protected rights. State court proceedings attempting to force military personnel to remove service decorations violate federal supremacy, while Judge Harrison's actions represent systematic constitutional violation requiring immediate federal intervention, announced Federal Judge Patricia Martinez during emergency hearing. Constitutional law established clear federal supremacy over state authority when military personnel faced civilian court harassment, while Sarah's case demonstrated systematic judicial ignorance requiring institutional education and federal oversight. Additionally, Lieutenant Commander Chen Silver Star is protected by federal statute preventing civilian court interference, while her military status provides constitutional protections that state authority cannot override. Martinez continued. Congressional oversight included immediate investigation of judicial training regarding federal law, while Sarah's case influenced legislation ensuring civilian courts received appropriate education about military law and constitutional supremacy. Furthermore, this federal intervention establishes permanent precedent protecting military personnel from civilian court harassment while ensuring judicial accountability for constitutional violations affecting federal military law. Martinez declared federal jurisdiction would monitor all civilian court interactions with military personnel, while Sarah's case created systematic protection ensuring service members received appropriate constitutional recognition rather than harassment from ignorant state court authority. Federal intervention transformed Judge Harrison's municipal traffic court into constitutional classroom, where Pentagon General Counsel arrived with federal authority to address systematic violation of military law and constitutional supremacy that civilian courts were required to respect. Judge Harrison, I am Patricia Williams, General Counsel of the Department of Defense, here to address your court's violation of federal law, protecting military personnel and service decorations from civilian interference, Williams announced with federal authority that superseded state court jurisdiction. The constitutional education included comprehensive briefing about federal supremacy, military law, and Silver Star protections that civilian courts couldn't override through local procedure, while Harrison's ignorance created systematic constitutional violation requiring immediate correction. Additionally, Judge Harrison, Lieutenant Commander Chen's Silver Star, was earned through classified SEAL operations requiring presidential authorization, while federal statute specifically prohibits civilian court interference with military decorations. Williams continued, congressional oversight ensured comprehensive judicial education, while Sarah's case became federal mandate requiring all civilian courts to receive training about military law and constitutional protections governing service members and veteran rights. Furthermore, Judge Harrison, your threatened contempt citation against military personnel exercising federally protected rights violates constitutional supremacy while creating federal civil rights violation requiring institutional accountability. Williams declared, federal investigation would examine Harrison's judicial record for systematic constitutional violations, while establishing mandatory training, ensuring civilian courts respected federal military law and constitutional supremacy governing military personnel. State Judicial Commission received federal complaint about Judge Harrison's constitutional violations, while his systematic ignorance of federal law warranted immediate suspension pending comprehensive education about military protections and constitutional supremacy. Judge Harrison's actions represent systematic constitutional violation requiring immediate disciplinary action, while his ignorance of federal military law demonstrates inadequate judicial education requiring remedial training, announced Commission Chairwoman Patricia Santos. Federal oversight included mandatory judicial education, while Harrison faced potential removal from bench for constitutional violations that demonstrated fundamental ignorance about federal law and military personnel protections requiring appropriate judicial understanding. Additionally, Judge Harrison's threatened contempt citation against military personnel represents federal civil rights violation, while his systematic harassment of service members warrants immediate accountability and institutional correction. Santos continued, congressional investigation revealed Harrison's pattern of constitutional violations, while his case became federal precedent, establishing enhanced judicial accountability for civilian courts that harassed military personnel through ignorance of federal law. Furthermore, Judge Harrison's actions violated oath of judicial office requiring constitutional compliance, while his systematic ignorance demonstrates need for comprehensive judicial reform ensuring federal law receives appropriate recognition, Santos declared. Federal monitoring would oversee Harrison's continuing judicial education, while his case influenced national training programs ensuring civilian courts understood military law and constitutional protections governing service decorations and veteran rights. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen received federal apology for constitutional violations, while her case established permanent precedent protecting military personnel from civilian court harassment through systematic enforcement of federal supremacy and military law. Lieutenant Commander Chen, the Department of Defense apologizes for systematic constitutional violations, while your case creates permanent protection, ensuring military personnel receive appropriate recognition rather than civilian court harassment, announced Secretary of Defense Patricia Rodriguez. Federal recognition included Sarah's appointment to Pentagon Legal Advisory Committee addressing civilian-military relations, while her case influenced comprehensive reform, ensuring constitutional protections received appropriate enforcement and institutional support. Additionally, Lieutenant Commander Chen, your Silver Star represents classified combat operations that civilian authorities will never understand, while federal law provides absolute protection from state court interference, Rodriguez continued. Congressional testimony established Sarah as expert witness on military-civilian legal relations, while her case influenced federal legislation strengthening constitutional protections for service members facing civilian court harassment. Furthermore, Lieutenant Commander Chen's case demonstrates successful federal intervention protecting military personnel while establishing institutional accountability for civilian courts that violate constitutional supremacy, Rodriguez declared. Sarah's continuing legal practice included military law specialization, while her foundation provided assistance to service members facing civilian court harassment, requiring federal protection and constitutional enforcement that her case had established through institutional intervention. Sarah Chen's federal court victory established permanent constitutional precedent protecting military personnel from civilian court harassment, while Judge Harrison's forced resignation created judicial accountability, ensuring future compliance with federal military law and constitutional supremacy. Congressional recognition included Sarah's testimony about civilian-military legal relations, while her case influenced federal legislation creating enhanced protection for service members facing state court harassment through systematic enforcement of constitutional rights. The Department of Defense established Sarah as legal advisor, while her case became mandatory training for civilian courts, ensuring appropriate recognition of military law and federal supremacy, governing service decorations and veteran protections. Federal compensation addressed constitutional violations while providing resources for Sarah's foundation, assisting military personnel facing civilian court harassment, requiring immediate federal intervention and ongoing institutional support. National recognition honored Sarah's constitutional defense while condemning civilian judicial ignorance that had threatened military personnel through systematic violation of federal law and established constitutional protections. The Chen precedent became federal constitutional law, requiring civilian courts to respect military decorations while establishing enhanced judicial accountability for constitutional violations affecting service members and veteran populations. Sarah addressed judicial education conferences monthly, her military legal background providing credibility that influenced comprehensive civilian court reform, while her case demonstrated successful federal intervention protecting constitutional rights. Federal legislation created specialized military-civilian legal coordination, ensuring rapid response when state courts violated federal supremacy while establishing enhanced penalties for judicial harassment of military personnel. National legal education included Sarah's case as constitutional precedent, while her foundation provided emergency assistance to service members facing civilian court discrimination, requiring immediate federal protection and ongoing institutional accountability. Her story inspired comprehensive judicial reform, ensuring military personnel received appropriate constitutional recognition while preventing civilian court harassment through enhanced federal oversight and mandatory judicial education programs. Sarah Chen's transformation from harassed defendant to federal legal advisor demonstrated how military training enhanced civilian constitutional protection, while her case established permanent precedent, ensuring service members received appropriate federal recognition rather than state court harassment. The Pentagon, where she now worked, became symbol of federal supremacy, while her continuing legal advocacy influenced national policy protecting military personnel from civilian judicial ignorance and constitutional violations. Her partnership with federal courts created permanent protocols ensuring military law received appropriate recognition while constitutional supremacy protected service members from civilian authority, attempting to override federal protections. Sarah continues federal service protecting military constitutional rights, while her case established permanent precedent ensuring civilian courts respected military law, demonstrating that military oath to defend Constitution created ongoing responsibility for protecting service members from domestic institutional threats. The Chen decision revolutionized federal-state court relations through mandatory respect for military law while establishing permanent constitutional protection against civilian judicial harassment of service members, exercising federally protected rights. Sarah addressed Supreme Court Historical Society monthly, her military legal expertise providing credibility that influenced constitutional education, while her case demonstrated successful federal intervention protecting military personnel from state court overreach. The Department of Justice created military-civilian legal coordination, ensuring rapid federal response when state courts violated constitutional supremacy, while establishing enhanced penalties for judicial harassment of military personnel. Federal funding supported military legal education, while Sarah's foundation provided emergency assistance to service members facing civilian court harassment, requiring immediate constitutional protection and ongoing federal oversight, ensuring institutional accountability. Sarah Chen discovered that her military service created platform for constitutional advocacy, protecting service members from civilian judicial ignorance, while ensuring federal supremacy received appropriate enforcement through ongoing institutional oversight. Her work establishing military-civilian legal protocols helped federal courts nationwide understand constitutional protections, while ensuring service members received appropriate recognition rather than harassment through judicial ignorance of federal law. The traffic court, where Harrison attacked her Silver Star, became training center for judicial education, demonstrating constitutional supremacy. When federal intervention protected military personnel from civilian authority, violating established law. The traffic court incident proved that military service decorations deserved federal protection from civilian judicial ignorance, while constitutional supremacy required enforcement when state courts violated military personnel rights. Sarah learned that defending Constitution required ongoing vigilance against domestic threats. Military decorations represent sacrifice that civilian courts must respect through federal law. When constitutional supremacy activates for service members, no state authority can diminish honors earned in blood. Some stars shine brightest when challenged by those who never earned the right to dim them. In the end, Sarah Chen learned that her Silver Star wasn't just decoration. It was constitutional shield that protected every service member from civilian ignorance. When she refused to remove it, she didn't just defend her honor. She defended every veteran's right to wear their sacrifice with pride, regardless of who demanded they hide it.